This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so let's get started. The topic is the embryo that was implanted in the wrong woman. And actually, this is going on in Israel right now. We had a number of cases here in California. And for the most part, the IVF industry is very, very meticulous and very careful, but inevitably mistakes are made. I just went to do some blood work for my yearly physical yesterday, and they print out on each. There's a sticker that goes onto each of the vials, and he asked me, I had to check each and every single one of them. A lot of scrutiny goes in, and we're trying to improve our means of the system that you put in place, but mistakes do happen. This is from October 26th. On the sheet you have that, the story as of then. The pregnant mother who was implanted with the wrong embryo and an IVF mix-up has given birth to a daughter after an extended stay at the hospital. So she and her husband went for IVF, and they were having difficulties having children, and ideally it was the father's sperm and the mother's egg that are united in a test tube. And once there is that, once it has been properly fertilized, then that is inserted into the womb of the mother, and that way she is carrying her and her husband's child. This morning, B'Shah Tovah, the baby girl who has recently been the subject of the public discussion, was born. The mother and infant are doing well, and the infant is undergoing a series of tests, Sheba Medical Center said in a statement. Earlier this week, the mother told Channel 12 News, "We are already the parents. The baby chose us. That's it. This is my daughter, and I'm not giving her to anyone." A little more background. The birth follows a difficult pregnancy, which included the discovery of a serious heart defect in the infant, along with a complicated surgery which risked the life of the mother. So the mother was putting her life in danger for the sake of this child, but successfully saved the daughter's life. Genetic testing performed with the intention of clarifying the infant's health issues, right? The infant was having health issues. They did some genetic testing to see if that would give the doctors and the team any insights as to best take care of this infant in embryo, led to the discovery that the infant is not the genetic offspring of her parents. It wasn't her egg, and it wasn't her husband's sperm. Opening a Pandora's box, which led to genetic testing of another couple presumed to be the child's genetic parents. Earlier this week, the results of the genetic testing showed that the second couple is not related to the child. So they are not the parents. We have a situation where we have a birth mother or mother, a surrogate mother who carried this child to term while putting her own life in danger for the sake of this child. And as of now, we don't know who are the genetic parents of this little girl. Thus far, Asuta Hospital, where the IVF treatments were performed, has continued its efforts to locate the genetic parents, but has not yet tested additional couples. Meanwhile, attorneys for the new parents have requested the court call a halt to the search for the child's genetic parents and declare the birth parents to be the child's legal parents. So that is where we are at today. Okay? Now.
So that raises the woman who gives birth to the child, is she not the mother?
Okay, so such errors are rare, but they do happen. And obviously it's very traumatic for everyone involved. The fundamental question is, who is considered to be the mother? Is it the birth mother? Is it the genetic mother? That's where this lies. Who is the mother? Is it the birth mother, or is it the one who gave the genes? Surprisingly, the Gemara speaks about this. Not directly, because certainly in Talmudic times there were no surrogate mothers. IVF was something obviously that was not viable. It wasn't even a thought. But we do have situations which the Gemara discusses where this is the very point. The problem is we have a seeming contradiction between the two sources that we're going to bring. We're going to then bring different resolutions to this seeming contradiction, and then we will go into, in terms of today's poskim, how do they view it?
Good question.
Yes, Dov.
A simple way of saying that's what Hashem wanted, that's it.
That's what Hashem wanted. What did Hashem want?
Exactly how.
Those parents having those children.
Who are those parents? Maybe Hashem wanted these parents to the birth mother to take care of the genetic mother's child.
Exactly.
I mean, who's to know?
There's cases where
Look, it can be argued either way, right? What is it that Hashem wanted? We could argue, well, Hashem wanted the birth mother to have the baby. That's why she gave birth to the baby. Or Hashem could say, no, Hashem wanted that this genetic mother should have a baby. And therefore Hashem orchestrated that the baby would be mistakenly implanted into this mother. And now the genetic mother has a baby. I mean, arguments can be made either way. And it's always very hard to say, this is what Hashem wanted. Right? Very, very hard to say, this is what Hashem wanted. I saw a very interesting targum in this week's parsha, right? So Eliezer goes to find a wife for Yitzchak, and everything works out perfectly. He offers his prayer. The girl who would offer this, and this, and that, she's the one. And he finishes his prayer, and what happens? Rivka comes and offers exactly that. And when he recounts the story to Lavan, her brother, and Bethuel, her father, they say, oh, may Hashem, this is from God, right? This is clearly from God. Yet, the pasuk says that when she came back to Yitzchak, it says, the Targum says, Yitzchak saw that her actions were lofty, that she was a very, very good, upright person, and he knew this was the one. What do you mean? Everything worked out perfectly for Eliezer. Well, things can work out a certain way, and that might not be exactly, maybe it's a challenge, who knows what. We can't look at that and decide. Let's look at the Gemaras and attempt to decide. The first is the Talmud Bavli. Everyone has the sheets over there, the second side of our sources here. The Gemara in Yevamot. Toshma, right? Outlined in red. Shnei achim tu'umim geirim. You've got two brothers, twins, who converted. Two twin brothers converted. So too, if they were emancipated slaves. Let's deal with the game that we're more familiar with. And one of them dies. They get married, and one of them dies, leaving a wife and no children. So normally the brother needs to do either chalitza to sever the connection, or yibum, which is a levirate marriage. Lo cholzin, v'lo miyavin. There's no chalitza, there's no yibum. Why? Because chalitza and yibum is all dependent upon their being paternal brothers. And over here, right, being that they have converted, well, they're not considered to be brothers. Ve'ein chayav mishum eshet ach. Take this a step further. If one of them were to have illicit relations with the other one's wife, So then we have a problem of sleeping with a married woman, but normally it would be also a second problem of a second prohibition of sleeping with a brother's wife, which of course is terribly forbidden, as is any married woman besides to the husband, right? But over here, there is no liability of brother's wife. Why is there no liability of brother's wife? No. That's a separate case. Now the brothers are alive, and one of them has an affair with the other one. So he's liable for an affair with a married woman. He's not liable for an affair with a brother's wife. Why is that? Because once they convert, how do we view that? Correct. Once they convert, it's as if they were now born, and they no longer, and they don't maintain those familial relationships. And even when they convert, they're not considered to be brothers anymore, right? Emotionally, psychologically, I'm sure they feel they're brothers, but halachically, they're not considered to be brothers. Fair enough. Let's listen carefully to this next case now. Haita horatan shelo b'kedusha. If the hora, if their conception was shelo b'kedusha, they were conceived before the mother had converted. V'leidatan b'kedusha, the mother converted during pregnancy. Interesting. So now, if we look at the birth, if we look at conception, right, then if we look at the birth, are they brothers? They were born to a Jewish mother, right? If we look at conception, they were non-Jewish at that time. So what seems to have happened? Somehow in the middle, if we're looking at the birth, they're brothers. If we're looking at conception, they're not brothers. What do we say? Lo cholz v'lo miyavin, that's a separate issue, chalitza yibum, but aval chayavin mishum eshet ach. There will be liability. If one has an affair with the other's wife, there will be liability of brother's wife. What does that show? That shows that we're looking at the birth. At birth, we have two boys born to a Jewish mother. Therefore, how do we view this? They're brothers. And if, heaven forbid, one has an affair with the other one's wife, then the liability is not just married woman, but also brother's wife. Do we hear that? According to this Gemara, if we say that they are liable for brother's wife when they were conceived before the mother's conversion and they were birthed after the mother's conversion, that seems to say we look at the birth, and that is the point. And they have that birth mother. Birth is the important point. They are brothers, and therefore they will be liable in the case of an affair. That is one of the Gemaras. However, if you look down, we have a second case over there, also which touches upon this situation. What is that? The Amar Rava said, Nachrit, a non-Jewish woman, Me'uberet, pregnant non-Jewish woman, Shenit Gayara, who converted, Bina, her child, Ein Tzarich Tevila. The child will not need to have an immersion in the mikvah when he is or he or she are born. I underlined the Rashi to the right of that Gemara. Ein tzarach tevila l'shum geirut. The child will not need tevila, immersion in a mikvah, in order for the sake of conversion. T'sakalei tevila de'imei, because the mother's conversion, the mother's immersion will cover the baby also. The mother's conversion will also count for the baby, which seems to say that this child needs conversion. But the mother's immersion in the mikvah, which worked for the mother, also worked for the baby. So over here, it seems to be saying, what do we look at? Birth or conception? If we're looking at birth, what would we say? Born to a Jewish mother. There's no need for anything. But here we're saying that no, the mother's immersion, right, helped for that child. The mother's immersion covered the child. So we see the child needed an immersion. The mother's immersion covered that child. So what do we see? We see that we look at conception. So the first Gemara about the brothers, the twin brothers, seems to indicate that we look at birth. And the second Gemara seems to indicate that we look at conception. So if the Israeli courts are confused what to do with this child, well, they might gain some solace in realizing the Gemara is also a little bit, I wouldn't say confused, but seems to have different views on it. Now, before we get to the what the practical halacha, what today's poskim say about this, there are a number of different approaches to the Gemara. How do we understand what this seems to be, this conversion? Okay, one approach is that we look at birth. Hello, Alice. We look at birth, and therefore this child didn't really need anything, didn't need the mother's immersion in the mikvah. Why are we discussing the mother's immersion in a mikvah? So Rav Naftali Trupp, and a special thanks to Rabbi Joshua Flug for providing for me and for many other rabbis all of these different sources. So he says, born to a Jewish mother is a full-fledged Jew. And mitzvot, everything is all there. However, there is another concept known as Kedushat Yisroel, a special Kedusha, a special sanctity of Yisroel, of being a Jewish person. And to attain that, this child does need to have immersion in a mikvah, but the mother's immersion covers also for the child. So one way of looking at it is that the second Gemara is the main way we look at it. And in fact, birth is what determines. So then why does it need any immersion even via the mother? That's to attain this higher level of Kedushat Yisrael. Yes, Dov.
She has another kid.
Sorry?
She has another kid already. That kid needs immersion.
She has a kid who was born before she converted?
Yeah.
Then the child will need to convert himself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Another approach from Rav Soloveitchik is as follows. Normally, upon conversion, a child or a person loses their connection to their other family members. But over here, where the conversion of both of these children and the mother all took place at the same time, right? Because they were twins, everything was simultaneous. So therefore, there they don't lose that, they don't lose. So really it's conception, according to this approach. And really they're gerim. But the reason why there is this prohibition of brother's wife, that is because they shared that the conversion took place simultaneously, so it did not completely sever the family ties as it normally does. I'll offer one more explanation, a very interesting explanation from the I think Bnei Avram, who says as follows: the mother converted while the child, right, after, let's say, whatever, we'll pick a number, after 4 months. So part of the child, the first 4 months of the child, so part of the child developed as a non-Jew, and therefore will need immersion. The other part of the child developed as a Jew, and therefore the brothers are considered to be brothers. So it's a mix, so to speak, of a non-Jew and a Jew. The non-Jewish component of the child, as the second source said, will require tevila, immersion, but the mother's immersion will also count for the child. The other part was fully Jewish after the mother's conversion, and therefore these boys are at least partially brothers, halakhic brothers. And therefore, if one were to sleep, have an affair with the other one's wife, then the liability would not just be married woman, but would also be as a brother's wife. So those are the different ways of approaching the Gemara's seeming contradiction, some of them placing the weight on the birth and explaining then why there's a need for immersion, and the others placing the weight on conception and needing to explain why then is there a relationship of this being a brother's wife if it's not really truly considered to be a brother. As we could imagine, when it comes to the poskim that we have, there also are different opinions. Rav Elyashiv Zatzal, he held that motherhood is determined by the genetics. And therefore, in this case, right, they should try to find out who the genetic mother was, and that is who should have the child. Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, he was a strong proponent of the view that no, it is birth that determines. And therefore stop looking, stop any investigations, case closed. She mothered this baby, she birthed this baby is hers. Many poskim, including of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, viewed it as a suffix. Right? And therefore, if a pregnant woman converts, then misafek, based on this suffix, suffix is an unsurety in halacha. Based on this suffix, the child would undergo immersion, right? Just to play, in order to cover all bases. Now,
Rob, I have a question.
yes.
So, in the case of somebody who's acting as a surrogate, has been hired for whatever reason, the mother can't carry the baby, but carries the embryo of the husband and wife, so there's no physical genetic, component to the surrogate, but that person gives birth. So I would assume that, these, like the Gomorrah would overrule whatever agreement is made between the parties or not?
Well, being that the halacha is unclear, so Esther asked about a situation where a regular surrogate was hired, right? So the halacha, would that trump any legal arrangement that they had made? Well, if there was clear halacha, right? If the halacha was clear that the birth mother is the mother, then that arrangement is this arrangement that I'm going to give birth to a child, but don't worry, I'm going to give the child to you. And based on the legality of such a contract, that would determine what the halacha is, right? But being that the halacha is unclear, so I think in such a case where that was the clear agreement going in, so then that is what a Beit Din, a Jewish court, would enforce. Now another factor is we can argue, we can debate who's the mother. Is it the birth mother or is it the genetic mother? Right? When it comes to the father, there's not much room for argument. Right? The genetic father is the father. Now, granted, we do have different opinions. Does a sperm donor, does he fulfill his mitzvah of having children? Some say he would, others would say no, right? He doesn't. But nevertheless, but there is still this factor, right? Of knowing who the father is to make sure that they're not marrying any relative that they're not allowed to marry. So the father is the father. So it comes out interestingly that according to Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, who says that it's the birth mother, but it's the donor father, right? So then we can get into some serious custody issues over here, right? She's the mother, but he's the father. Again, in this case, we don't know who the father is, right? Or who the genetic parents, both the egg and the sperm, who they are. The media in Israel has compared this to what they call Mishpat Shlomo, right? The case of King Solomon, the famous case of King Solomon. That one woman had a baby, says that it's mine. That one says, no, that was my baby, you took it. And famously he said, right, to cut it in half, though that was never really his intention. But what that accomplished was it became clear who the true mother is. Now, when it comes to cases of custody, in the case of a divorce, the Rambam writes that the child remains with the mother until the age of 6, presumably with visitation from the father, and the father is required to provide support payments. What happens afterwards? So then the Chuvas HaRashba seems to say that it's the Beit Din's responsibility to figure out what is Tovat Hayeled, what is in the best interests of the child. And the American court system also will work within what is the best interest of the child. Now, the best interest of the child will not mean to take the child away from either parent, because there's a wonderful family who'll be really great for the child and give them to strangers, unless the parents are deemed unfit to serve as parents. But otherwise, we work within the options. Those who have a legal claim, we work within that to determine what would be best for the child. And in the case of Shlomo, of King Solomon, so these were two women of, we'll say, of ill repute that we're dealing with over here. So probably would have been better for the child to go not to number one, not to number two, but to some outside coherent family structure to raise the child. But that was not an option. Meaning, the Tovat HaYeled needs to, the benefit of the child means within those who have a valid claim, that's who it needs to go to, the Tovat HaYeled. And what Shlomo was doing, because one of them was holding on to the child. Now, in general, we have a concept called muchzeket, right? If I say, Steve, that wallet I see that's sticking out of your pocket, that's my wallet. That's my money in there. So if I want to take the wallet or the money away from Steve, we say, Amotzi mechavero alav haraya, right? If I want to take it away from you, the burden of proof is upon me. That's how it works. The burden of proof is upon me. So over here, one woman had the child. So the burden of proof should be on the other one. But Shlomo wanted to show that she was clearly, if she was okay on cutting the child in half, then she is clearly not the right one to mother this child. So if we don't find, coming back to our case over here, if we don't find the other parents, if we don't determine who the genetic parents are, then it makes the most, then clearly it would stay with the birth mother, because there's only that one claim that we have. The question, though, is, should the hospital be actively pursuing, and the court seemed to say not, or at least the attorneys for the new parents have asked the court to call a halt to the search for the parents, the child's genetic parents, and that would then, all we know is who the birth parents are. We don't know who the genetic parents are, but we don't know who the genetic parents are because we're not actually looking for them. But they probably could narrow it down, well, probably to tens of parents, and they might be able to come forward and make a claim. So again, according to Rav Elyashiv, this is the child of the genetic parents, and steps, it would seem, should be taken to determine who they are so they can have their child. According to Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, end of story. We know who the birth parents, the birth mother was. She's the mother. The child is hers. According to Rav Shlomo Zalman, where it's a suffix, so I would imagine in such a case, you don't have to go and vigorously try to find who the genetic parents are to bring this suffix, this doubt, to a head and force something to be done. Right? So if the other parents would be found, so then there's no telling which way a Beit Din would go. Being that we have different opinions. We also have the fact that this woman has already given birth. So coming back to King Solomon's case, she's holding on to the baby when they came before the court. She is muchzeket. She's holding on to the baby. She had the baby inside for 9 months, and now she's holding on to this now born baby. So that would seem to put the onus more on the genetic parents. And when there is, according to Shlomo Zalman, if you have this suffix, we don't know which way to go, then we would go with the muchzekes. We go with the one who's holding on to the baby. Yes, Dov.
Shlomo HaMelech, why he didn't just go make it a typical case for and Tumim, and that's it? That would be a solution too.
I think Lo B'Shamayim Hidov. Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, so as we see, the Israeli courts are unsure what to do. The Gemara had what seemed to be two different views. We have different explanations for that seemingly contradictory statements of the Gemara. Some of them putting the emphasis on the birth and explaining then why did it need immersion of any sort. Others putting the emphasis on the conception and explaining then why there is an issue of brother's wife. When it comes to the contemporary poskim, there are different views, and we highlighted how, according to one who says it's the birth, you could have a very, very strange situation where that's the father, the husband of that couple is the father, whereas the mother of this, with the woman of this couple, is the mother, right? We take into account Tovat Avlad, what's best, Tovat Hayel, what's best for the child. We also take into account Muchzeket, the one who has control, who has it. And therefore, if that other family does come forward, it's going to be a very, very interesting. Well, I doubt it will go to the Beit Din, who probably would remain in Israel's secular courts. Were it to go to a Beit Din, then that would certainly be grounds for another Lunch and Learn as part 2 to see where the halacha was ruled. And even then, I'm sure different Batei Din might reach different conclusions on that. Okay, my friends. Yes, Dove.
And I think they're going to need another immersion in Torah.
Okay, Dove. That's a good idea. All right, we'll call it over here, my friends.
Thank you, Rabbi.